Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
How to introduce this pod. Our June and July plans have been blown to bits by the announcement of a snap summer election. But if we're honest, it's made the summer a little bit more interesting. Then on top of that, the Senedd has its most interesting day since Alan Michaels resigned ahead of a vote of no confidence 24 years ago. He lost that vote anyway. But this lost vote, no First Minister has resigned. So the Hiraeth team have parachuted in to discuss all the political issues of the last few weeks, and especially this afternoon, and look ahead to the month forthcoming. Evening, Matt.
Evening, Kerry.
Richard, how are you?
Well, thank you, Kerry. Just like I'm as healthy as Welsh politics.
Well, we are recording about 2 hours after Vaughan Gething lost his vote of no confidence. We have to start there, really. Matt, you are our Labour lead. What on earth is going on?
Well, I'd like to start this story, Kerry, with this morning, where I was very fortunate to go on the BBC Radio Wales breakfast show, and I confidently predicted that Vaughan Gething would win any vote of no confidence in him. And then about 25 minutes later, the story leaked to the BBC that two members of the Welsh Labour group were not going to be able to vote. It became apparent, therefore, quickly after that Vaughan Gething was going to lose any vote of confidence in him. And that is what happened. There was a long debate in the Senedd this afternoon with a number of speeches, most notably probably from Andrew R.T. Davies and Hiraeth. A speech from Paul Davies highlighting that his own experience of when he was found to be not living up to the standards expected of a leader, where he resigned as leader of the Conservatives in the Senedd. And there was also a number of speeches in support of Vaughan, notably from Vicky Howells, Joyce Watson, Hefin David, and also my favourite speech of the entire proceedings, probably, from Mike Hedges, who, and if people have been paying close attention to Welsh politics for the last few weeks, they would have remembered the iMessages that got leaked. These iMessages are what led to the sacking of Hannah Blythen as Minister for Social Partnership. And in those messages, it was talking about using an algorithm to select the new member for a certain constituency. And in Mike Hedges' speech, he announced that he was the member in question, and that Jeremy Miles had been the member who had been asking whether an algorithm could be used to replace him as the member for Swansea East, which was, jaws on the floor when all that information, which has sort of been semi-public knowledge for a couple of weeks in bubble circles, was just announced. And then Vaughan Gething made a statement, and he came out absolutely fighting. And if you've looked at the tweet that Welsh Labour Press have released subsequent to the debate, subsequent to the result of the vote, it's pretty clear that that is Welsh Labour's default position now. They will come out fighting. They have basically called Plaid and Conservatives hypocrites for talking about integrity in public life, highlighting recent issues that Plaid Cymru have had that led to the Project Power report, and also the numerous issues that have been surrounding the Welsh Conservatives and the Conservative Party in general, relating to donations and the what's been going on with Laura Ann Jones and her expenses as well. So I think it's pretty clear, not only from Vaughan's statement today, but also the Welsh Labour attack lines following the vote, that in Vaughan Gething's eyes, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it was an interesting afternoon. There were some good speeches, and Vicky Howells making Vaughan cry. I've been there. Vicky's an old friend, definitely made me cry. Mike Hedges, yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. I genuinely thought Labour's approach to removing someone if they wanted to was to just give them something in the House of Lords, though, but maybe not for Mike. Rich, is this all fair game, or is it much ado about nothing? What's your take on it?
Yeah, well, my general take is that I think it's a pretty sad state of affairs about the entire institution of the Senedd. I think, unfortunately, it's a confluence of different events. I thought that while you would quite rightly expect opposition parties to use any leverage that they have to try and, give advantage over a governing party, particularly in the middle of an election, I thought that there were actually quite a lot of speeches that were basically imploring the First Minister to just be a little bit more contrite. And I think, unfortunately, there are so many painful issues kind of wrapped up with this situation. As we have much discussed previously, there have been accusations of racism going around, the perhaps or perceived as unfair criticism of the First Minister. There have been intra-party rivalries within the Labour Party, no surprise there, really. But actually, in the Welsh context, it's very rare that they would bubble up to the surface. And I think, I think at the heart of it is actually a First Minister who has struggled with criticism. Vaughan Gething has, over the years, on a number of occasions, not least to provide title credits for our friends over at Walescast over the years, but also in interviews with ITV and elsewhere, proved himself to be somewhat brittle and somewhat unwilling to display any kind of humility on when challenged, as opposed to when just giving, what I thought was quite a good speech from the podium when he was elected as First Minister. My takeaway is that actually I wish everybody was a little bit better. And I think it's just disappointing, actually, for Wales that this is this is the only time, and Matt and I were just chatting just before we started recording, that this is the one time every decade that the gaze of the UK media is on Wales and the National Parliament here. And it's another instance where things are not looking great. And the big concern for people who believe in some form of home rule for Wales is actually that if the public see the Labour Party as the natural party of government in Wales, and they see the Labour Party doing a bad job in Wales, that actually they will start to turn potentially against the institution or the idea of devolution or home rule. So, yeah, not great. How about yourself, Kerry?
Yeah, it's a strange time, isn't it? Up until today, I didn't think Vaughan would be under real pressure to leave by, it's only going to be from the Labour Party which gets him to leave. And I didn't think in our chats, I just thought he would fight it out. I think the general election came along, took the pressure off him. But then today, I didn't think he'd lose a vote of no confidence until, as you said, Matt, that it appeared that two members, Lee Waters, Hannah Blythen, are ill and able to vote to support him, so hence losing. So I think there is a schism in Welsh Labour, and while the official comms might be that it's all squared behind the First Minister, that clearly isn't the case amongst Senedd members, and from other messages I've got from other people within the Labour group and membership wider who are out knocking the doors, being told that it is going through to general election knocking now. So I'm not sure where it leaves Labour, really. Labour in Wales is all powerful. If they're united and want to front it out, I think they can. But it's a real strange time for Labour. Yesterday, Mark Drakeford was very animated as a backbencher in the chamber, discussing another one of his policies around school term reform. And there were body language issues all over. Hevin David left the chamber and quite angry. Jeremy Miles's body language was really quite uncomfortable. What is it, Matt? Is there that schism? Or am I reading too much in it? Is it like changing of the guard at the top? Because it's not just Vaughan who's changed. It's all new SPADs. It's all new officials supporting him. There's a lot of change. Is it just a bit uncomfortable for some people as the party slightly reorganises?
Look, I think it's a matter of public record that there are certain tensions within that group, especially relating to the saga that's been going on with donations to Vaughan Gething's leadership campaign. We've seen the public statements from various members of the group. We know that there's a number of them who wanted the money returned. I think that during a general election campaign, party unity is key, and it's something that's at the front of everybody's minds during the campaign. I said this a couple of weeks ago when we did that emergency pod over what I thought would be the wildest weeks in Welsh politics for a while until this week came along. this moment is too important in the eyes of the Labour Party to let chaos ensue. I can't see a situation in which this becomes all-out war, and I definitely can't see a situation where this becomes all-out war during a general election campaign. The party simply will not allow that to happen. It's why I remain confident that Vaughan Gething will stay in post as First Minister for the foreseeable future. It's why I, on the basis of the evidence I had this morning when I went on Radio Wales, made the prediction that he would survive the no confidence vote, because I'm completely convinced that if the pairing system had held up and two Conservative, or one Conservative, one Plaid MS, were paired out of that vote, he wouldn't have lost the vote of no confidence either. I simply can't see how the Labour Party would allow that to happen, especially during a general election. Don't get me wrong, there are tensions, but don't get me wrong, there are tensions.
This is where we helpfully step in to avoid you saying something that would be unhelpful to future Matthew. And I think that's perfectly fine. Can we think about this through the lens of the UK election for a second? What impact do we think, if any, do you think this will cause?
On the Welsh Labour election campaign, I think the impact will be fairly minimal. I mean, I've been knocking doors all along South Wales for the last few weeks, and I can honestly say that everything that's been going on with Vaughan has come up a couple of times. I think people are much more focused on the actual issues of the election. Don't get me wrong, a number of people are asking about devolved issues. That's absolutely clear. But I don't think that what's going on with Vaughan in the Senedd is going to have a significant impact on how people vote on July the 4th. I just can't see it happening.
But I think the question really is whether other parties, opposition parties, will seek to use this during the election period and how much salience that will have. My suspicion would be, as with most things related to Wales, even though it might make a nice line on the floor of the Commons as an attack line, I actually think that most people in most of the United Kingdom couldn't care less what happens in Wales. And I'm not sure it's going to have a great deal of effect, even if it becomes a campaign point for the Conservative Party or others.
Being highly cynical, Rich, this is probably going to be a story in the UK media for a day, maybe two. If Vaughan were to resign, that's a story for a much longer period of time. As we were just discussing, the national media only really ever covers Wales when something like a leadership election is going on, or there's some massive scandal or voting issue. That's the only time it ever covers us. I really can't see it being covered in any great depth. I think that as policies get announced by the main parties, as more debates happen, we're getting the manifestos at the end of next week, the media will move on quick. Maybe not the Welsh media, but the UK-centric media will move on very quickly from this story.
Point of order, Your Honour, just to clarify, when Matthew is talking about national media, what he's talking about is the UK-wide media, as opposed to the national media, which would apply to the nation of Wales.
Thank you, Rich, for that very important clarification.
Very welcome.
Look, I think we're all in agreement that what will happen next, that there isn't going to be any great change, that the UK media will move on. Welsh media will probably still keep finding things are still coming out. So who knows where it will go. But in terms of the party, like BBC Wales this morning, take what you said as gospel and see what happens in 2 hours' time. But you mentioned the general election there, Rich, and we've been talking about this, preparing for it for a little while, had our kind of outline plans for the autumn, and we even had a little flutter on when it would be. And technically, I will mention that, Rich, you said I won, but morally, I think Matt had the closest date with a June call. But that snap election, Rich, for you and I, definitely a surprise, wasn't it?
Yeah, for you and I and almost everyone, including most of the Conservative Party, quite right. Yes, it was a shock. One might talk about things such as first mover advantage. If you think about, psychology, is it useful to be on the front foot? Well, yes, it can be useful to be on the front foot. However, if you discover that everybody else is quite a number of miles behind you, you can look a little bit like a prop forward running at the try line, with all of his backs still in the 22. Yes, I'm trying that. Sorry, that may have died a death, but you know what I was trying to say. Basically, you're going to lose the ball and probably give away a penalty, and that is probably the most torturous metaphor that I can give to Rishi Sunak's conduct over the last couple of weeks. He had a terrible set of choices. Do you want to lose at this time of year? Do you want to lose later in the year? Do you want to lose next year? He's decided that he'd rather lose in the sun, which, who can blame him? And is there an outside chance that the loss will be less bad than it could have otherwise been? Yeah, that remains a chance. He's been considerably further damaged by the staccato arrival of Nigel Farage, or return of Nigel Farage. It's going to be very painful for them. No two ways about it. The Twitter survivors that are still on the platform at the moment will have seen that three of us batting some ideas back and forth, but my basic argument is that of the 32 seats in Wales, 26 of them are going to be nailed on for Labour, at the very least, and there's a couple that are in play in the north and west. So, everything is going to go to script, even though the timing of the election has changed. I actually don't think the result is necessarily going to be any different than what we might have expected. Matthew, let me pass the ball to you.
Yeah.
Talking about the death of Welsh Rugby Union, Rich.
Oh yeah, we should. That's a whole other podcast, isn't
it? Hey, Osprey's in the knockout stages. Chance not dead yet. I've got a question about the start of the general election, but which I wanted to put to you on the Labour's campaign so far. But you were regularly in the last couple of months mentioning to us that the likelihood of a summer early election was definitely a big rumour in the political bubble in Westminster. But, was it a surprise for you as well? Or do you think those rumours finally came to fruition?
I had sort of come to terms with losing my £5 bet to you fine gentlemen. And I did think it was going to be in November. Up until that morning. And then, yes, I did text a couple of friends up in Westminster and no one could disprove it. So I think I was fairly confident by about 10:30, 11 that it was going to happen on July 4th. So whilst, of course, it wasn't quite what I was predicting at the time, I had always thought that it was going to be late spring, early summer. And I've been proven right, even though if I still have lost the bet to you, Kerry.
It is a technicality. It is.
It is a technicality. It's very much a technicality.
Okay, so if it's not that surprise though, but so we're into it now. We're coming up to 2 weeks in, and I think, as Rich mentioned, Wales is going to stay a sea of red, but it looks like it's quite likely that the rest of the UK will be a sea of red as well, with a landslide win, no matter what happens in the Welsh Senedd. But it hasn't been an easy start to the campaign for Labour. It seems to be dogged by issues so far, whether it's Diana Abbott or Gaza. Is that fair, or is it just the media we're getting is presenting it as that?
I think candidate selection, which is I think what you're basically hinting at, Kerry, and don't worry, we can talk about the Welsh candidate selection situation as well.
No, but I was going to come to it, but it was the UK level.
Diana
Abbott and the other person who was deselected, I can't remember.
So yes, there have been a number of issues relating to candidate selection. There always is. I always go back to the Stephen Bush quote on this, which is every part of the Labour Party has at one time or another held every possible view on internal Labour Party democracy, depending on whether it suits them or not. So during the Corbyn years, the imposition of candidates. You're seeing through the Starmer years the imposition of candidates. And they are usually favoured sons and daughters of those in charge of the Labour Party. So it's no great surprise that this is happening. My default position, I said this again this morning, my default position has always been that Labour Party members should be the ones who pick their candidates. I think that is the ultimate test of whether you can win support and win seats, is by taking the support of your local membership. Now, don't get me wrong, some people talk to me about the primary systems and how much better that is in trying to bring a broader cohort of people in terms of selecting candidates for key seats. But my default position has always been that members should pick their candidates. Now, we have seen a number of examples of this during this selection process. So, and you've seen a number of candidates deselected with very little time left to pick alternative candidates. Rich did a very for those who are using the audio format of this podcast, Rich just made a hand gesture. So yes, there's been a number of candidates that have been deselected at rather short notice. But I think the rationale for that, it feeds back into this sort of Ming Vast strategy that the Labour Party have been working on for the last couple of years. They don't want to take any risks. They don't want any candidate to have anything even remotely like a questionable backstory, a dodgy tweet being on the wrong stage or the wrong person at the wrong time. They don't want to take absolutely any risks. And the Diane Abbott situation was deeply, deeply unfortunate. I think it was quite clear for a long time that she would eventually be readmitted into the Labour Party. But why the process took so long, and why the decision to reinstate her as a Labour candidate was taken at such short notice is deeply regrettable. Now, what I heard, and this does feed into what I'm sure is going to be your next question, Kerry, is that had Diane Abbott not stood in her, I can't remember the exact seat name, but her Hackney, East London seat, that one Torsten Bell may have been selected for that seat. So that's what I've heard.
Well, that is interesting. We'll clip that one up and put it out. But Rich, I want to come to you because Keir Starmer committed quite publicly in his leadership campaign and his tweets at the time are doing the rounds now that there would be no more imposition of candidates on constituencies. And then, well, here we are. And you and I have got a slightly different view, I think, on some of this. But do you want to just tell us what's happened in Wales?
Far be it from me to speak Labour to our in front of our Labour friend here. Two very different situations. The Cardiff West situation, sitting MP Kevin Brennan was and former tremendous history teacher at Rada Comprehensive, if I may add that in there, was expected, as far as I'm aware, to fight the seat, and then decided for various reasons, no reason to question them necessarily, but the timing was interesting that he decided to step aside after the deadline at which the Labour NEC, or in the Welsh context, the WEC, would decide who the candidate was for the constituency. And such it transpired that there was a vacancy at just the right time for a decision to be made about who would stand rather than expecting the local constituency to choose it. I'm not sure whether I'm completely alone in not having heard of the candidate barely at all, other than in connection with the extraordinarily unsuccessful leadership campaign of Owen Smith, upon which I believe Alex Barros Cohen, is that right? Worked.
Alex Barros Curtis
worked. The situation in Swansea West End was, which was much chatter, was what was happening over there. Long suspended former MP Geraint Davies. There was a question of doubt about what was going on with that, and not entirely dissimilar to Diane Abbott. The decision about replacement was taking an extraordinarily long time. Some people might say an artificially long time, so that this same deadline would be very close to the actual decision in order for the same kind of process to follow. Now, and not that everything goes back to Diane Abbott, but the situation with Diane Abbott, as I understand it, was that there was hopes amongst the Labour leadership that a deal could be struck at which she would be readmitted and persuaded to not stand, and then might find herself in, sort of Ermine adjacent at some point. And then she refused to basically buy into that and wanted to remain to fight the seat. And we all know what then happened. And then, good candidates become available. And where I have somewhat differed from, other opinions on the podcast is that actually, whilst I am predisposed to agree with Matthew that, local candidates in a constituency should be selected by party members in that constituency first and foremost, Actually, I think the candidate in Swansea West is a very good candidate. Torsten Bell did some. I like to see really good quality people in government. I think that is unarguably a good thing. And not all candidates who have held that seat in the past or have held seats in surrounding area have made huge intellectual or policy contributions to Parliament. So I think he's incredibly talented and actually quite Devo literate. He just a month or so ago, he did a tremendous interview with the former First Minister, Mark Drakeford, at the Resolution Foundation, where Mark Drakeford talked about a number of issues related to devolution and the ongoing issues that are unique to the Welsh settlement. So, as a broad principle, I agree with the sentiments of Matthew, and I think yourself, Kerry, but actually in this instance, I think Parliament will be richer for having Torsten in there. Matthew.
I want to put on record that I think that both candidates will make excellent MPs if they're elected, and very likely, because of how accomplished they both are, they probably would have won the elections. But and that's the view of a number of Labour members, but there are also those who feel it's like almost a foundational principle of their Labour Party membership. They believe very heavily in Labour Party democracy. So they're obviously very upset about these, let's call it what they are, impositions of candidates. Now, I think, like Rich, they'll make brilliant MPs. But let's not be around the bush that there is some distaste in certain bits of the Labour Party about how this happened. And there also are, I think, justifiable concerns that skilled local candidates were overlooked. But that could very have easily happened in a selection. But at least a selection would have given people the choice.
And without wanting to cast any aspersions over the Labour Party, this is not unusual behaviour for the Labour Party. And as Matthew, as you said earlier, just a few years ago, these things were happening, but with a different weighting in terms of who the leadership's preferences for candidates were. And people will remember former instances of this. We have Chris Bryant, obviously, in the Rhondda. That was a huge controversy in the local CLP at the time. And people have already reminded people of the position of Jim Callaghan and others. How about yourself, Kerry? What's your view on this?
But this is one of my pet bugbears, and Labour doing this have made the two West constituencies the focus on parachutes. So Brecon and Radnor and David Chadwick, the Lib Dem parachute, is positively an old resident in comparison to Labour doing this. So there's not a lot to say. I think you two have covered it. It's not the way I would do things. The snap election, yes, no question they're going to be good candidates, but what an MP can bring to a role, I think, is an interesting one we might look at again, because I think an awful lot of good people can become an MP. And if you look at the lists of people locally who were interested in those roles, I think the chief, the head of Swansea Council was interested. I think Rob or Rod could do. Rob Stewart might feel aggrieved. Not going to put words in his mouth. I saw a couple of very kind of high-profile ones on the Cardiff West list as well, who I think might feel aggrieved in a different time.
A few friends of the pod as well, which is quite nice.
But as I think you and I, or we've discussed, I see a role of an MP. It's not just about representing the party and being a good MP in Westminster. It's about representing that local constituency, really knowing what's going on, what the issues are, and being that civic leader and having that voice. And in Wales especially, devolution gives an added aspect on that. There needs to be an understanding of the civic makeup in Wales. Health has devolved, education has devolved. Those two great parachuted in candidates have to be able to do that. Like today, what's their view on Vaughan? What's their view on where Welsh Labour are currently? They've got leadership positions in Welsh civic society, and are they really up to speed and where they need to be? Any other job, they probably wouldn't have got it. But party impositions is the way it works. Anyway, enough about parachuting. Those are going to be two interesting constituencies. They're going to go Labour. Let's move on from that. There's a few other interesting sites in Wales. Matt, you can come in, but what are the other constituencies in Wales we're going to be interested in? Most are going to go red, I think. So where have we got some interesting splashes of colour in Wales?
I think there's only 5 really like questionable seats in this election in Wales, and let's go east to west. You go Monmouthshire, depending on your geography, the Vale of Glamorgan, Brecon and Radnor, Carmarthenshire, Caerfyrddin, and Mid and South Pems to me. Oh, sorry, and Ynys Môn. Yeah, and Ynys Môn. Yeah. I think are the only real 6 toss-up seats.
Do you agree with that, Rich? Are we all on those 6? Yeah.
Well, I'm not so sure about Vale of Glamorgan. I think the 6 that I would probably have are Monmouth, the 2 Powys seats, Maldwyn and Glyndŵr, Brecon Rhondda and Cwm Tawe. Caerfyrddin is definitely a question mark, and Ynys Môn, absolutely. Those are probably the only ones that I would suggest are in doubt. I'm pretty sure that Vale of Glamorgan will.
Yeah, it's going to go red. So we've only got a little bit of time, so let's focus on a couple of key ones, because the only ones I think are really in play are that Carmarthen one. So let's start there. What's the makeup of that at the moment, and where could it go, Matt?
So really interestingly, Kerry, if you look at the notional data, so that is what would have happened in 2019. Stop rolling your eyes at me. What would have happened in 2019 had that election been fought on these boundaries? Caerfyrddin would have been a Conservative seat. So I think it's actually very interesting that the Conservatives aren't really anywhere in the discussion about who's going to win that Carmarthenshire seat. It looks like a straight fight between Plaid Cymru and Labour. I think it has started to edge ever so slightly into the Plaid fold with the news that Jonathan Edwards, former Plaid Cymru, then independent MP for Carmarthen East and Dynevor, was not going to stand as an independent candidate. He could have taken a couple of thousand votes, and given how close that seat will probably be on the morning of July 5th, that could have made all the difference. So I think that one is still kind of too close to call. My gut says Carmarthenshire will go Plaid, but if there is a big national swing, it wouldn't shock me if it went Labour.
Could be one of those seats where the Vaughan fallout maybe pushes people a bit more Plaid. Rich, pick one of those 5 seats which we think are in play. What's an interesting one for you to look at?
Yeah, so very, very similar dynamics actually. I would say Ynys Môn is the other one that I think most people would perceive as being Plaid Labour too close to call at this stage. Currently held by Virginia Crosby, Conservative, won in 2019. Ynys Môn has this weird reputation for not ditching MPs. It only seems to change parties when MP stands down. But I think that is not going to be the case this year. The question really is whether the Labour Party's really strong campaign machine, and the fact that Ynys Môn is, I think, their 21st target seat in their list of target seats, very high up there, probably not least because of the position of Oelva as a potential nuclear site. That's a very important leg of the Labour Party's energy strategy. The question is whether that campaign can maybe overcome what perhaps could be perceived as a slightly less strong candidate or a less well-known candidate. And in Plaid's camp, you have, the strong, Welsh language-led campaign. You've got a great local candidate, the council leader, Llynnos Medi, and the question is whether that will be enough to take the seat for Plaid. I honestly have no reading on the Conservative campaign there, but I think it would be you'd be a very brave person to suggest that the Conservatives could hold that seat. My guess would be, certainly based on the polling that has come out today, it will probably edge towards Labour. But it's probably the best chance that Plaid have had of retaking Ynys Môn since Ieuan Wyn-Jones stood down, however long ago that was now.
Kerry, what's your seat to watch?
Well, you two have just covered the two which I think are most in play for me. So when we do our little map predictions this week, I think those are the two. I've got them both going. No, Ynys Môn I've got as Labour, and Carmarthenshire I think I've got as Plaid. But all the others I think will be Labour. We've talked about, apart from the two Powys ones, which I think will be Conservative. So the one I'm going to pick on, just to have a quick chat and get your opinion on, is of course Brecon and Radnor and Cwmtawe. Is it Cwmtawe? It's just so the Boundary Commission have done a blinder there.
If you think that name is long, my friend, you wait to see what they do when they pair those Senedd constituencies.
Oh, we'll have to come back to that. There's too much excitement going on. So I don't actually think it's in play. I'm focusing on it because it's my home constituency. I fear that if I ever stood there, people would now call me a parachutist, which just blows my mind. But it's in play. I think I can't see Felly losing it, but I think it's the strongest site for Lib Dems to try and get scores on the doors. And in fairness, the local Labour candidate who turns up at everything, Matthew Dorrance, is putting a lot of effort in, and there's a lot of campaigning going. I can't see it going Labour, so I think it's wishful thinking. But maybe Lib Dems could come into it. I don't know. Either of you?
My thought processes on Brecon and Radnor and Cwmtawe are very in keeping with the kind of thought processes I have for Ynys Môn, which is, although ever so slightly different. So I think Labour or the Liberal Democrats could justifiably think that they could take that Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe seat. But the problem is that because both parties feel that they can win that seat, they are eating into the anti-Tory vote. If there were simply one party that the anti-Tory vote could coalesce around, I could see a situation in which either the Labour or the Liberal Democrats could take that seat. But at the moment, because there is no clear alternative due to the boundary changes and the differing experience of the candidates, etc., I can really see the Conservatives just coming through the middle. And you're not talking huge percentage swings. You're talking maybe the Conservatives holding on to that seat with, say, 33, 34% of the vote. And the same in Ynys Môn. Now, again, I do think the Conservative vote share will drop nationally. But again, Ynys Môn has a very hard habit of not getting rid of incumbent MPs. Now, I don't think that the Conservatives will win Ynys Môn, but the way they do it is if the anti-Conservative voter bloc can't pick its candidate. And if that happens, then I could very easily see Virginia keeping the seat. But it does depend on how voters choose to vote. Of course, as a Labour Party member, I would say, please vote Labour. But that's not necessarily the decision that everyone will make.
And I'll say that I just want to say on Ynys Môn that other parties are available.
I want another fiver bet on that Ynys Môn. There's no way that's going to stay Conservative. No way at all. Rich, sorry.
No, I don't think so.
No, can I just add that the reason why I don't think it's going to stay Conservative, Matt, is because I think that Reform will take enough of the Conservative vote from 2019, that specifically sort of post-Brexit, get Brexit done vote. I think that will go to Reform. And I think that will be the thing that hits the Conservative ship below the waterline there. And I just don't think that they'll be able to hold in that.
Now you mentioned Reform, I do want to go there because while Wales might not be that interesting with not many seats in play, the wider UK, there are lots of interesting areas. You mentioned Reform, Rich, and I know they haven't got a platform, so given the media coverage isn't really what other parties want. But Nigel coming back, standing in Clacton, all that's created that media wave. But also in the wider UK, SNP, predictions aren't great. Lib Dems, there is a resurgence, at least in England. And, let's mention the Green have got a good chance of at least doubling their number of MPs. there are interesting areas, Rich. It's not just reform, is it?
I fully agree. I think I'll try and be super quick here. I think the Lib Dems are really interesting. They've made a very, very sensible campaign calculation to have what is essentially a non-aggression pact with the Labour Party by essentially focusing all of their efforts on conservative seats, conservative-held seats. And I think that if there's a very slim chance for Lib Dem victory in Brecon, Radnor and Cwm Tower, sorry, got to drop the Rhondda in somewhere, then it is because of that non-aggression pact. And if Labour could potentially take that seat if they had perhaps put their foot down to the ground on it, but they soft pedal, then there is a chance that the Lib Dems might take that seat. I don't know enough about the situation in Scotland to really comment on that. I do think that the Green fight in Bristol Central, I think it's Bristol Central, is interesting, with a prospective future UK cabinet member in Llangwm Debonair being potentially at risk in a seat that is almost exclusively made up out of Green-held council wards. However, third time's a charm. I'm going to mention the Rhondda again. What we know is that when the Labour wants to win a specific seat in Wales, as it did after Leanne Wood won the Rhondda in 2016, it will mobilise its campaign machine to try and make sure it keeps the seat or takes the seat back. And I think that Llangwm Debonair will be safe. I'm sorry to say, I think that the Labour Party will make sure of it. Although, things change in the course of a campaign. I think, you look at the makeup of that seat and it does lean leftier than the Labour Party is currently presenting itself. So there's definitely a chance, but I think it will be unlikely. And I just finally on reform, I think it will be interesting as somebody who believes in proportional representation. I think actually it's going to be another case of very sad times for people who want to see reform MPs. I think there's a chance they might get one. But actually, there are people who believe in that message and have always done. And I think it will be quite extraordinary in Wales if reform get more votes than Plaid Cymru, because that will tell us an awful lot about Wales, and it will also tell us an awful lot about the unrepresentative nature of our voting system.
Matt, why the UK stuff? Anything particularly pique your interest out of those areas?
I think the first poll we've seen today, after Nigel Farage announced his the fact that he was taking the reins back of reform again, is very interesting. Reform are now only 2 percentage points behind the UK Conservative Party in a YouGov poll that came out today. I know that the mood in the Conservative Party has lifted after the sort of score draw that was the first televised leaders debate. But I can really see panic setting in within the Conservative Party if reform get neck and neck or start to overtake the Conservative Party, because first past the post is one hell of a drug. And as soon as you start falling below a certain threshold, you start to get really punished by first past the post. And if you think that the big MRP polls and even the regular opinion polls have been bad for the Conservatives, wait to see what happens if they start coming in third place.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned the Greens there, Rich, because that's obviously the kind of key aspect for the UK I was angling for. And interestingly, Herefordshire North, near my home constituency, could be in play as well. But
no.
That is optimistic.
I've seen that bar chart that the Herefordshire North candidate has produced. Okay, it'll make the Lib Dems proud. Okay.
And just to wrap this section up, I also would like to say that just like the rest of what Matthew would call the national media, I quite like the fact that we're not going to talk about Northern Ireland at all. Great.
I rushed this script today for this emergence, and I should have. But yeah, okay, you can touch on Northern Ireland if you want, Rich. But we've got one more question. Main question really is, it's 2 weeks in. We haven't really. There's been a lot of things put out on what it is. In the TV performance last night, it was tax. Rishi beat Keir Starmer with the tax attacks. Labour are going after the Conservatives about stability, the economy, areas like that. Personally, I'm a bit worried. While manifestos aren't out yet, it will come out when they're launched, and we'll pod about that. But I'm quite nervous that climate change is completely absent from any of this and some of the other big policies. Matt, what do you think will be the policy drivers for the rest of this campaign? You know, Reform are going to go immigration, Conservatives are going to go tax. Where do you think Labour will go when they launch that manifesto?
The economy. This election will be fought on the economy, whether that is immigration, whether that is the cost of living, whether that's energy bills. It all goes back to the economy. Labour's attack line throughout this election will be that, do you feel better or worse off than you did 14 years ago? Have the Conservatives managed to improve your life chances or your quality of life or your economic stability at all within this 14-year period? And their argument is no. So if you look at Labour's GB energy pledges, the reason they're doing that is for economic reasons. That is not only to inspire green growth, but also to eventually bring down the cost of energy for consumers. So the economy is where Labour will fight this election, and every policy, broadly speaking, will have, I think, an element of economics at their core.
Rich, any big policy areas you think will come to dominate or should come to the fore?
No, I think I'm just going to make two pleas. One plea: can we never have any leadership debates ever again televised? I think the format is atrocious, and actually we should be expecting better from certainly from our public service media. There are better ways to do things, and that's terrible. And the second thing is simply the one thing that I think was highlighted in that debate, and actually the UK media is still very bad at doing, but is slowly perhaps showing signs of being better, is understanding that the UK is a multinational, multipolar state, and that this election is essentially about top level macroeconomic policy, defence, and foreign affairs, and most of those public services are actually devolved, and we need to have a better conversation about how the public understand that. How about yourself?
Well, like I said, I mentioned climate change, the environment. I think water is going to get fair coverage, but the wider climate issues just aren't really featuring at all. And it is all linked in for me. I think climate change is linked to immigration, the economy, energy. It's all part of the mix. And I think it's a little bit like you said about the TV debate, Rich. They're presented in such a way where it's very kind of getting that kind of thick, quick soundbite and beating someone rather than having some nuanced discussion on real policy issues. So I agree, the format's not working at all for me, and would be interesting to see where they go, particularly when they have all 7 parties on a stage somewhere. Look, I'm eating into someone's getaway time, but I do want to finish this on, a little bit of predictions. What do we all think is going to be the position on the 5th of June? 5th of July, actually. Sorry, today's the 5th of June. So in a month's time, what do we think we're going to see in Wales and in the UK as a whole? Richard Martin, to you, please.
Oh, fine. Okay. Well, I love a prediction. I love being completely wrong. We have a very good track record of it. The broad lines are the case. That there is going to be a Labour-led government in Westminster with a healthy majority in the Commons. There is going to be a very difficult defeat for the Conservative Party, and there's going to be a lot of subsequent battles for the future soul of the Conservative Party in Wales. What did we just talk about? Between 26 and 28 seats for the Labour Party. The question is really, what is going to be done with that? I'm not too fussed particularly about the future of Vaughan Gething. I'm not sure whether his individual presence in the seat as First Minister makes a huge amount of difference, because Welsh Labour policy is largely unchanged under him. But actually, are things going to change for the better for the people who live here? And for the, as you quite rightly say, Kerry, I think things like the local environment, rivers, is it going to get better? Because that's actually what people really want. They want better public services. They want better standard of life, and they want a better environment to live in. And yeah.
Well, Matt's next.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of, and again, I love a prediction, given that I've already done one today and been horrifically wrong. Thinking of the Welsh seat situation, Kerry, I think there will be 26 Labour seats, 4 Plaid Cymru seats and 2 Conservative seats. I think there will be a very close battle in Carmarthenshire and Ynys Môn, but the Plaid Cymru will eventually just pip Labour. And that the Conservatives will keep the 2 power seats, again, not by massive margins, but they will. And with that in mind, I think that the Labour majority will probably be around. I mean, I think the polls will tighten at some point during the campaign. I don't think they can stay quite as they are with such a vast difference. I'm predicting a Labour majority of somewhere between 80 and 120.
Surprisingly low.
And yes, I'm being incredibly pessimistic because I don't want to be hugely disappointed. And knowing me now, we're all doomed for a hung parliament.
Well, I'll be quick. I still see Vaughan Gething as First Minister in Wales. I thought I had the same figures as you there, Matt. Didn't I say 2 Conservatives and 4 Plaid, but something along that line? But that is not a lot of difference in that.
I've got your map here, my friend, and you had Ynys Môn going Labour, you had Carmarthenshire going Plaid, you had the 2 power seats staying Tory, so you had 27 Labour and 3 Plaid, 2 Tory.
Yeah, and you just said you had 4 Plaid. Okay, right. That's where I got it wrong. There's not a lot of difference between any of us on that. At the UK level, I'm far more supportive of Labour. I think people are incredibly fed up with the Conservative administration, both in terms of the length of time and the people we now have at the top. And I see Labour, and I think I predicted in another forum this week, I went 194 seat majority. I'm not sure how that trickles down for all the others, but I see the Conservatives in a very bad place on June the 5th. And I guess we will all be back doing something on some platform on July the 4th. I've got the date wrong every time, haven't I? With the audience can join in with us. Is that right, Rich?
I think that's the plan, Kerry. And I as we're doing this, how big is Labour's majority going to be? I'm going to take what I think the winning position is, which will be 200 seats plus easily.
Expectation management, my friend. Expectation management.
Matthew, I'm not a Labour member. I don't have to do expectation management for a party of which I am not a member, Matthew.
And if you would like to see just how wrong we may be come the morning of July 5th, we will be posting our predictions this week on social media.
Right. Before I go, I do want to ask anyone who listens to our pod to suggest a new name for the Brecon and Radnor and Cwmtawi constituency. Best name wins something we've got in the merch cupboard. We'll send that out to someone who can give us a decent name for my home area. And gents, thanks for joining us. Same time in a few weeks.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you have enjoyed what you've heard this evening, please don't forget to find us on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. You can go to our website, www.walespolitics.com. And also, thank you very much for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/Hiraeth Pod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review.